If you're standing in the aisle of your warehouse or a cramped construction site wondering whether a manual pallet jack with extra long forks is worth the price, you're not alone. Who really benefits from a 4,400-pound capacity jack? Who should walk away? And does the everyday buyer get a fair deal? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a few days watching how small shop owners, a couple of retail managers, and a freelance mover each tried out this global industrial model. And I'm going to break down what I learned so you can decide if it belongs in your toolbox. First off, the extra long fork claim isn't just marketing fluff. In my testing, the forks measured enough to clear standard 48-inch pallets while still reaching the pallet's edge when the load sits deep on the pallet. That extra reach mattered when I set up a mock retail stockroom with narrow back-off-the-door aisles. A typical 48-inch pallet would sit half in, half out of the aisle, and a standard length jack would force the operator to angle the forks awkwardly, risking the load tipping. With the longer forks, the pallet stayed centered, and I could pull it straight out without a second pair of hands. If you routinely work in tight spaces, think boutique furniture showrooms, small-scale manufacturing floors, or a delivery dock that squeezes between concrete columns, this extra reach is a real time saver. Durability is the next practical checkpoint. The frame is forged steel, and you can feel the heft the moment you set it down. That weight isn't just about feeling solid. It translates into less flex under a full load. I loaded the jack up to its 4,400-pound rating with a stack of concrete blocks, and the forks held steady with no wobble. For anyone who moves heavy items day after day, say a construction crew hauling bagged cement or a retailer shifting bulk inventory, knowing the jack won't bend under load is reassuring. The steel also stands up to the occasional scrape against a concrete slab, something you'll see in a real warehouse where pallets aren't always perfectly aligned. Now, the control system. This model uses a 3-position fingertip lever that lets you lock the fork height, engage a rolling mode, and release the load with a quick tap. In practice, the lock position feels firm enough that you can start pulling a loaded pallet up a slight ramp without the fork sinking. The roll position gives just enough freedom to glide over smooth concrete, and the release is almost instantaneous when you push the lever back. For a one-person operation, that tactile feedback is worth the modest learning curve. If you've ever struggled with a lever that feels mushy or a brake that never really catches, you'll appreciate the crispness of this design. On the flip side, the manual nature of the jack introduces a hidden trade-off. While there's no battery or hydraulic pump to maintain, you do need to supply the physical effort, especially when you're near the 4,400-pound limit. In my trial, moving a fully loaded pallet of steel girders required a steady push and a bit of body weight behind the handle. If you're a sole operator with limited strength, that can become a fatigue factor after a few loads. A powered or hydraulic jack would take that strain out of the equation, but it also adds cost and maintenance. So the decision hinges on how often you'll be loading near the top of the capacity range. For occasional moves, like a small contractor hauling a few pallets a week, the manual effort is manageable. For high-volume warehouses where dozens of pallets shift every shift, you might end up spending more in labor than you saved on the price tag. Speaking of price, the global industrial jack sits in the mid-range market. It isn't the cheapest manual jack on Amazon, but you're not paying for extra features you'll never use, like motorized controls or built-in scales. The value comes from the combination of a high weight rating, the extra long forks, and a sturdy steel build all in a single, no-frills package. If you compare it to a standard 3,000-pound manual jack, you're paying roughly 20% more for a capacity boost of about 1,400 pounds and the longer reach. In real terms, that means you can consolidate heavier shipments onto fewer pallets, saving space on the warehouse floor and reducing the number of trips you need to make. Who should buy this? Small to mid-size operations that regularly handle pallets heavier than the typical 2,200-pound limit, and that have enough space to maneuver a longer fork without hitting walls. Think of a construction supply shop that stocks bags of sand, a metal fabricator moving steel plates, or a seasonal pop-up store that needs to unload bulk inventory quickly. If you're a DIY hobbyist who only moves a pallet or two a month, you might find the capacity overkill and the manual effort unnecessary. Likewise, if you run a large distribution center where forklifts dominate the floor, a manual jack extra long or not will likely sit idle, while powered equipment does the heavy lifting. Practical strengths summed up: the steel frame.